Use desire wisely, Buddhism's hidden key. We go through life propelled by our desires. Sometimes we get what we want and we're satisfied for a while, and then we're not so satisfied, so we generate more desires. We take it for granted that that's simply the way things have to be. Some of us think that, well, maybe if we get a lot of things, they'll make up for the lack of other things. So people amass things, amass power, amass wealth, thinking that a little wealth didn't satisfy, but maybe a lot of wealth will. Or a few things didn't satisfy, but maybe a lot will. Or one partner didn't satisfy, so maybe a lot of partners will. But that wasn't the Buddha's approach. He wanted to find something that left no need for further desire. But then he also discovered that he really had to desire it to find it. There's a passage where, after he gained his awakening, he said, "All things are rooted in desire." Thing. The word here is dhammas, and that can mean both good and bad phenomena. Everything you experience, he said, is rooted in desire someplace. After all, when you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and think about things, you're not simply a passive recipient. You're out there looking for things to sense, looking for pleasures, looking for some satisfaction. That active side is rooted in desire. But then nibbana, the Buddha said, is the ending of all dhammas. It's the one thing that's not rooted in desire, but to get there requires desire. This is why desire is one of the bases for success. The image that Ananda gives is of going to a park. To get there, you first need to have the desire to go, seeing that it's worth the effort. But then when you get to the park, the desire's gone. Now imagine a park that would be so totally satisfactory you wouldn't desire anything else in life. That would be nibbana. But such a satisfaction seems so far away and so improbable, and the path seems so hard that we find ourselves saying, well, maybe I'll put up with X or put up with Y, and that'll be good enough for me. In this way, we sell ourselves short. We have the potential to find something that puts us beyond the need for desire, and yet we go around desiring and looking for other things. The Buddha called those other things the objects of an ignoble search. The noble search is the search for what's deathless. So you have to ask yourself, how much do you want it? This is where motivation comes in. The Buddha focused on heedfulness as an ideal kind of motivation, one who sees danger and respects being heedful, as in the chant just now. The phrase, seeing danger, is one of those fanciful etymologies that come from the commentary. They take the word bhikkhu, monk, and they cut it into 2 syllables, and they decide from the meaning of each syllable that it means one who sees danger. It's fanciful, but it is appropriate as an educational etymology. In other words, an explanation that tries to get a fruitful meaning out of the word regardless of whether it's etymologically true. When you hear the word bhikkhu, it's useful to think, someone who sees danger. Because that's precisely what the Buddha was. Someone who saw danger. He had all kinds of wealth, all kinds of sensual pleasures, the potential for all kinds of power, but he saw danger in all these things. You get used to them and you're going to lose them, so you fight to save them. But then you lose them anyhow. And what happens then? You fall. And you don't just suffer when you fall. You take out your suffering on others, which will make you fall even further. Seeing the danger in that, he said, I've got to find something else. So when you look at your own desires of what you want in life, ask yourself, do you see danger in what you desire? This evening, I was reading a passage by Ajahn Chah where he said when he ordained first as a novice, he didn't see any danger in life. He didn't really understand what ordaining was all about. But then as he became a monk and started studying, he began to realize that there's danger in all kinds of things, especially the things that are really attractive. He said it was like seeing the best kind of banana they have in Thailand, Kluai Nam Wa, but realizing that there's poison in it. No matter how much you like that particular kind of banana, knowing that there's poison there, you avoid it. So when you find yourself wanting something that's going to let you down, remind yourself of the poison. The same if you find yourself indulging in some sort of addictive behavior, whether it's substance abuse or emotion abuse. In other words, letting yourself stew in emotions that are really not productive, but you get some sort of satisfaction out of them. Self-pity, resentment, or whatever it may be. Look for the poison and then remind yourself that it is possible to get past that. It is possible to get the mind in a state where it doesn't like that anymore, doesn't need it anymore. And try to cultivate a desire for a safe place. As the Buddha says, see renunciation as rest. See that by letting go of the things that you've been thirsting for and craving for, there's a greater sense of well-being and security. You might tell yourself, I can't manage this path. I won't be able to get to the end. But think about this. When you develop the path, you're going to change as a person. The path will turn you into someone who is capable of reaching that goal. So try to put that fact in your mental calculation. As for the part of the mind that asks, this particular course of action, is it worthwhile or not? Tell yourself that it may require a lot of effort, but if it repays really well, maybe it's worth doing. And if you tell yourself, I don't have the energy to put all that effort in, well, that's one of the reasons we practice the path, because it gives you more energy as you develop it. So do your best to remind yourself that this is a really worthwhile goal, something that lies beyond anything in our culture. Because that's another big problem in our culture, thinking that there's nothing to us aside from how we've been shaped by our culture. We live in a land of wrong view that tells us that this kind of path isn't worth it, that it's not really real, or that people who follow it are losers or deluded. And the media is so oppressive these days. People carry a little bit of the media around in their pockets and subject themselves to it constantly. As Ajahn Fuang used to say, people in general are disturbed by people who are more heedful than they are. They don't want to be told that there are dangers where they're finding pleasure, so they're going to dismiss you. You have to ask yourself, am I going to allow myself to be blinded by their blindness? You have to wish them well, but you also have to say, I have to resist that particular influence. And it's not just a matter of living in a country that hasn't been shaped by Buddhism. Even in Asia, where there are countries shaped by Buddhism, people who practice have a hard time getting their families and friends to see that it's a good thing. They say, do a moderate amount of practice, which is the middle way of the defilements. They say, well, do it a little bit, but don't take it too seriously. So the practice is always going to be countercultural. This is why, as Ajahn Mun said, you have to replace the culture you were raised in with the culture of the noble ones. This is what everybody in the practice has to do, to adopt new values, to adopt a new vision of what is possible in life. It's through thinking in these ways that the desire to follow the path can get you on the right track. After all, the path, like everything else, is rooted in desire, and you have to keep nurturing that desire. And although we have Dhamma talks and books and everything to help you, you're the one who has to read them and apply them and say, this really does apply to me, and I really do want it. Think of the Buddha. He wanted this really strongly. He wanted it so strongly that he was willing to try anything, even 6 years of self-torture. Fortunately, we don't have to follow that particular path. But you're not going to get rid of the need for desire just by telling yourself, well, I'm just going to stop desiring. You have to focus your desire on the right place, on the causes that lead to a result that's really satisfactory. The end of desire is not simply a decision to stop desiring or to give up or be apathetic. The end of desire is reaching something so totally satisfactory that you don't need to desire anything else. That's the success to which these bases of success are aimed. rooted in desire. The Dhammapada starts with 2 verses on the topic of the power of the mind. The mind is the forerunner of all Dhammas. The mind is their chief. They're made of the mind. And we may say, on one level, that this sounds reasonable. The way you look at things, the way you act, will have an influence on what you experience. But it goes a lot deeper than that. Everything comes out of the mind. Everything you experience comes from the factor of fabrication in dependent co-arising that's even prior to the experience of the 6 senses. We sometimes tend to think of the mind as being something passive, receiving input from outside and then responding in the old stimulus response mode, that only after the stimulus do we play a role in shaping things outside. But that view is much too passive. Things start with the movement of the mind outward. That's where all the trouble comes from, and so that's where the problem has to be solved. As the Buddha said, everything is rooted in desire. All Dhammas are rooted in desire. Everything except Nibbana is rooted in desire. You look at the 4 noble truths, the causal truths, i.e. the second truth and the fourth, the cause of suffering and the path to the cessation of suffering are actions. There's the action of craving and clinging. There's the action of the desire in right effort. So the question is, which desires are you going to follow? And how deep does it go? This question of how the mind is shaping things. A lot deeper than you might think. This is why insight comes from asking questions about actions, because the results of actions are pleasure and pain. And the Buddha says, look at that pain. Where is it coming from? What's the cause? And he tells us to look into the mind for the cause. Of course, to deal with pain, we need to have a sense of pleasure someplace as our foundation, which is why we practice concentration. Right effort leads to right mindfulness. We're remembering to give rise to skillful qualities, and we're remembering to try to abandon unskillful ones. Right mindfulness then forms the theme around which right concentration develops. So this desire to put an end to suffering leads to mindfulness, and from there, it leads to getting the mind to settle down and be really still in concentration with a sense of well-being so that it can look at what else is going on at a deeper level. The greater the stillness of the mind, the more subtle the movements of the mind you'll be able to see. And you keep wanting to ask, is there any uptick in the level of stress? Any lowering of the level of stress? If you can catch that, you ask yourself then, what did I just do? What arose together with the stress? And what passed away together with the stress? This is why the cause of stress is called samudaya, something arising together. Because after all, part of your experience is based on past actions. And it's hard sometimes to see the relationship between a past action and a present one. As the Buddha said, the workings of karma are really complex. Sometimes an action may not date just from your last previous lifetime, but from lifetimes before that. How would you ever track that connection down? What you can track down is what you're doing right now. And as I said, in dependent co-arising, what you're doing right now, the fabrications that usually come out of ignorance, come prior to input from the senses, even the sixth sense, i.e., the mind that's aware of ideas. So you're already shaping things before you have any input at all. What we're trying to do as we practice is to shape things with knowledge, with awareness, alertness. That's what the questions focusing on stress do, because otherwise you just go flowing through the various causal links in the chain without paying much attention to what you're doing. It's become so natural that you don't see the extent to which you're fabricating things. Only when you ask questions do you begin to notice, oh, there was something happening there. I did this and this resulted. So learning how to ask the right questions at the right time is an important part of gaining discernment. The Buddha said that it's a sign of people of discernment, how they approach a question, how they frame the question, how they apply it. His observation applies to the discernment related to understanding not only how to explain ideas and to ask questions about ideas you've heard explained, but also how to question the workings of your own mind. What are the perceptions that shape the way you're going about things? What are the assumptions? The assumption of self is a big one. The various perceptions about your relationship to the world, those are also things you've got to learn how to question. And a good place to start is your relationship to your breath. How do you focus on the breath in a way that gives rise to well-being? How do you focus on it in a way that gives rise to stress? What's the difference? This is something we have to look at over and over and over again, because only when you've been over and over something many times do you see the details. A John Lee's image is of walking back and forth on a path. You see the little things on the side of the path you might not have noticed if you had walked down the path just once. The little changes. Certain plants are growing. Certain trees are dying. Certain flowers are blooming or wilting. Certain animals are crawling across the path or on the side of the path. If you're preoccupied with other things, you're not going to see these things no matter how many times you go back and forth. But if you're curious and observant, you'll see things on the side of the path that weren't there before. You'll notice something's changed, something's up. In particular, you want to look at your actions. What are the desires underlying your actions? We all know that desires tend to be blind. How do you bring some vision to them so that you see not only what you want to see, but also what's actually going on? The Buddha gives you lots of detailed instructions as to where to look, what kinds of questions to ask. Now, you may find that the particulars of your situation right now require slightly different questions that derive from the Buddha's basic ones. The trick lies in learning how to tweak them so they're just right for you. The point that doesn't change is that the questioning can't be done in the abstract. It has to be focused on what you're doing right here, right now, as you get the mind into concentration. That's the ideal action to look for, even when you're engaged with other themes of meditation aside from the breath. There should always be the question, what are you doing? And are the results consistent with what you've done before? When you're contemplating the body, the 32 parts like we chanted just now, there are days when it's easy to visualize the different parts of the body and say, yeah, that's all there is to the body. Why are those days different from other days when you resist seeing the body as unattractive? Why is it so easy to shift back to your old perception that the body's something good-looking, something attractive? What was the desire that skewed your perceptions? This question focuses on a particular action, which is why the Buddha set the Four Noble Truths as his definition for right view, because as he said, the cause of suffering is an action. The path to the cessation of suffering is an action. This is to keep our minds always in that framework. The problem is that even in Buddhist circles, people shift away from that framework to a more passive view. A couple of months ago, when I was working on the book on the Noble Eightfold Path, I was reading other books explaining the Noble Eightfold Path. And I was struck by how many times the authors, when explaining right view, would make a brief mention of the Four Noble Truths and then shift almost immediately to the three characteristics, saying that the Four Noble Truths are true because things are impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self. That's the reality out there, and we suffer because we cling to things that change. The implication here is that if we didn't cling, then we could still live with things that change and there would be no problem. And on one level, that's true, but that assumption doesn't bring us to a place of real peace. To get to that place, you have to see that the things are changing because your desires are changing. It's not that you're sitting here just misunderstanding the nature of things and trying to force some permanence on things that won't be permanent. Any act of clinging is going to cause suffering. Even if you cling to the experience of the deathless, you're going to suffer. Another problem with basing right view on the three characteristics is that the implication is that if you don't resist change, then you'll be okay. You're told, just go with the flow. Don't have any fixed views. Allow everything to change. This idea is sometimes even used to justify changing the Dhamma. Of course, the Dhamma is going to change, but the Buddha didn't regard that as a positive thing. His image was of a drum. A crack develops in the drum, and so you place a peg in the crack. Another crack develops. You place another peg. Eventually, the whole drum is nothing but pegs, and it's not going to make the resonant sound the old drum made when it was one solid piece of wood. Changes in the Dhamma don't go in a good direction. So the Buddha's not simply saying, well, learn how to accept change and you'll be okay. He's saying, you're creating things that are changing and then you're latching on to them. You're clinging to them. That's suffering. In fact, your clinging is creating things from which you suffer. So you've got to turn around and look at that action of clinging, and be sure to make use of the help that the Dhamma gives. Don't try to change the Dhamma, because otherwise it's not going to be as helpful to you. So remember, the basic framework is the Four Noble Truths, and the Four Noble Truths start with actions. Our experience is all based on action. So whenever there's suffering, you ask yourself, what are the actions leading to that? Get the mind still enough so that it can see and know where to look. The problem isn't out there with the world. The problem is in here. We play a role in creating our experience, and then we forget about it, and then we blame the experience. So turn around. Look at the part of the mind that's constantly fabricating things in ignorance, under the force of desire. Bring some knowledge there through your questions, through your mindfulness and alertness, and all the other good qualities you're trying to develop in the concentration. That's when you get to the root of the matter. Then when you get to the root, everything falls apart. But it doesn't fall apart in a bad way. It opens up to something that's unfabricated, that won't change. When there's no desire to create dhammas, we open to the end of dhammas, where there's no clinging, no suffering at all. It's like finding the right key and putting it in the right keyhole to unlock things so that everything good will open up.